Welcome to this presentation on navigating global markets, from the GILT framework to AI-enhanced localization workflows. My name is Elena Brandt. For those of you who don't know me, I'm an academic. I'm the founder and principal trainer at Loc Essentials, and I'm membership secretary of ASTM F43. Here's our agenda for today. We'll cover the GILT framework and best practices in software internationalization. We'll look at an overview of a localization workflow, and we'll take a brief look at translation and localization specifications. Next, we'll consider how translation and localization specifications can be automatically integrated into workflows using LLMs. Finally, we'll conclude by acknowledging the people who work together to make global experiences local. Before diving into localization, it's helpful to first situate this concept among related concepts that deal with producing multilingual products for international audiences. Globalization deals with the infrastructure that enterprises put in place to carry out international operations. Internationalization is the development of software that is culturally neutral, with the localization-ready architecture that can be customized to locales during localization. Localization is the adaptation of products and services to specific locales in the world. Translation is the work that's done to render the language of an organization's communications, products, and services to the language variant spoken in a specific locale. In translation, words like equivalent and accurate are often used to describe the writing that results from translation. However, it's important to note that by virtue of being in a different language, aspects of the meaning of the source content will be lost, and the target language will also add meaning that was not present in the so-called original. The components of the GILT framework are interrelated and interdependent, since the localization of products implies the need to navigate law, hire local talent, and support users at all stages of their customer journey. When working toward global market expansion, globalization and internationalization form part of the main highway. However, some organizations, eager to reach new markets quickly, opt to bypass directly to localization and then have to deal with inefficient processes that require constant rework, inconsistent brand messaging across markets, technical challenges in adapting products for different locales, and higher long-term costs due to the need for retrofitting. While localization strategy shapes an effective globalization strategy, it is often relegated to a downstream process in the product development lifecycle. Localization teams are often handed minimum viable or fully featured products that have been validated for their original market but that are not prepared for localization. Let's take software internationalization as an example. Key aspects of internationalization to ready software for localization includes externalizing strings by moving all user-facing text out of the code and into separate resource files, and using string IDs in the code instead of hard-coded text. Ensuring that the application uses Unicode encoding, such as UTF-8, to support multiple languages and character sets. Avoiding string concatenation by using parameterized strings instead of concatenating fragments, as word order can change in different languages. Allowing for text expansion in user interface design, as some languages may require more space than others. For dates, times, and numbers, using locale-aware data types that can adjust to different formats. Avoiding the hard coding of cultural assumptions by not assuming specific date formats, currency symbols, or sorting orders. Supporting bidirectional text by ensuring that the UI can handle both left to right and right to left text directions. For operations like sorting or case conversion, using locale-aware functions instead of language-specific ones. Implementing plural rules. Languages have varying plural forms, and a plural rule system must be used to handle this correctly. Avoiding hard-coding images with text. Text should be kept separate from images to allow for easy translation. Can you spot the internationalization issues in this code generated by Claude 3.5 Sonnet? There are concatenation issues in the plus operations used to combine strings. There is a hard-coded date format of month, day, year, which is not universally used. The dollar symbol is hard-coded, which isn't appropriate for all locales. There is a plural form handling issue in the conditional statement at the end. This simple if-else statement doesn't account for languages with more complex plural rules. Finally, hard-coded string issues appear throughout the entire function. All user-facing strings should be externalized for translation. As these types of issues pile up, that results in a higher internationalization debt, or the accumulation of internationalization issues that need to be addressed before effective localization can occur. Here's an improved version of the code that addresses the localization issues in the following ways. String concatenation was replaced with the dot format and getText methodologies for easier translation. Where we previously had a hard-coded date format and currency symbol, we're now using Babel's format date and format currency functions, which are locale-aware. We've implemented a more comprehensive plural form, handling that can be more easily translated to languages with complex plural rules. The user-facing strings are no longer hard-coded and are instead wrapped with the getText function, making them translatable. Also, the locale parameter has now been added. The function now accepts a locale string, allowing for easy switching between different locales. Please note that to use this code, we'd need to install Babel. For a full implementation, we'd also need to set up proper translation files for getText, but this code structure allows for easy integration of translations. If you'll allow me one more example of an internationalization issue, code also needs to be updated to handle name ordering in different languages. For example, in English, the given name comes first, and in Chinese, the family name comes first. Here's an example of the output of code that has been adapted to different name ordering conventions that also shows how the greeting itself can be translated. These are all issues that an AI coding assistant could be set up to help localization-aware programmers to identify to ensure that software is properly localized. Let's move on. Let's assume that proper globalization and internationalization frameworks are in place. Now let's consider localization. This is a localization workflow model that I've taught for about 7 years now. It's based upon an illustration that I recently had published in the Handbook of the Language Industry in my chapter called Translation and Localization Project and Process Managers. Let's walk through the workflow. In this workflow, a client submits a work request. Specifications, or the requirements for work, are defined and then the work is quoted. Assuming that the client approves the quote, pre-production begins. Resources are put into place. The project is prepared for production through such steps as pre-editing the source text, gathering terminology, carrying out pseudo-translation to determine where text expansion or contraction may take place in order to identify where adjustments to the overall design may be needed. The work is passed through machine and human translation in a translation environment tool that separates the language for translation from its packaging, whether that packaging be a Word document or a website or some other structure. When the language work is complete, the language is reincorporated back into the design of the product. In-context and functionality checks take place, and then finally the work is delivered to the client. Now, a guiding principle in my work in translation and localization has been time investments during front-end stages yield the greatest efficiencies on back-end processes. I've come to this principle after discovering many unknowns during localization. For example, Khmer, a language of Cambodia, uses different keyboard configurations to produce different fonts. If I need the content to be localized into a Unicode font, I need to define that requirement upfront in specifications to avoid a great deal of rework further downstream. So let's start at the beginning and take a deeper look at specifications. For clarity, we'll start with a working definition of specifications. According to ASTM International, an international standards body, specifications are the explicit set of requirements to be satisfied by a material, product, system, or service. Now, specifications are important in every industry. Specifications are particularly important in translation and localization because quality here is so subjective. If you ask a group of 5 translators to translate the same content, no two will produce the same translation, and they'll also have different ideas about the quality of each translation. With specifications, the primary objective is therefore to take this fuzzy idea of translation and localization quality and make it objective. At the end of translation and localization, if we've met the requirements in the specifications, we have achieved quality, so long as the specifications are accurate and complete. Defining accurate and complete specifications is no small matter. Specifications need to address the requirements of the requesters of the translation and localization services, their end users, and the teams producing the content. Specifications also need to make any implicit expectations of the receiving culture that may not be obvious to localization producers explicit. That's why using standards-based specifications is so important in achieving desired outcomes in translation and localization. Let's discuss the standards-based specification template for translation and localization work that I have developed over the past 7 years. This template is structured into various parameter groups. The project specifics outline unique requirements for each project within a product line, while the remaining parameter groups are meant to provide general guidelines applicable across the entire product line. Within these specifications, language work, often translation, is defined in harmony with the definition used by the International Federation of Translators as work performed on the textual aspects of the content for rendering. Within these specifications, design work, i.e. localization, is defined as work with non-textual aspects of the content for rendering. According to the MQM framework, design includes text, paragraph, and user interface element formatting and markup, integration of text with graphical elements, and overall page or window layout. Okay, let's take a closer look at a few of the specific parameters collected within the parameter groups, starting with the product line parameters. Under product line parameters, the verticals for the work are defined. Vertical is a synonym for subject field, subject matter, domain, or discipline, and refers to the specialized subjects encompassed by the content. Defining the verticals of the work is an important precursor for determining the terminology and linguistic conventions that should be followed within the content. Under legal and confidentiality concerns, important parameters are defined like whether or not moral rights will be granted to language service providers like translators and translation agencies. According to the U.S. Copyright Office, within copyright law, the term moral rights refers to certain non-economic rights that are considered personal to an author, including 1, the right of attribution, or the right of an author to be credited as the author of their work, and 2, the right of integrity, or the right to prevent prejudicial distortions to their work. In the United States, translators typically don't receive moral rights over their work, but this can vary in other countries. For instance, federal law in Mexico grants these rights to translators. Navigating differences in international federal law is an important aspect of translation and localization work. Data security and protection form another vital component of our specifications. Given that about 75% of translation work is outsourced, it's crucial to define how data will be accessed and protected. This is especially important when dealing with confidential content. When it comes to language parameters, we go beyond simply specifying the language and variant. We go deeply into the demographics and experiential background of the target audience. This detailed understanding allows us to make appropriate terminology and stylistic choices in translation. I also want to emphasize the importance of establishing parameters around the language aspect of localization work. While it may have been undervalued in recent history, language is the primary way people communicate and engage with brands. Neglecting this component can contribute to user experience debt, potentially leading to decreased user satisfaction, higher churn rates, and negative brand perception. It's worth noting that the process of establishing these specifications, especially when onboarding new language service providers, can take months. This is due to the complexity of addressing legal concerns, setting up data security systems, and establishing the additional necessary infrastructure for carrying out work. By carefully considering all these aspects in our specifications, we ensure that our localization efforts truly speak to the intended audience, maintaining brand integrity across different markets and cultures. Let's move on now to thinking about the reality of the translation and localization production floor. If I'm working as a project manager for an organization with a heavy volume, I do not have the capacity to fully review all of the content that's being sent for localization in order to develop robust project specifications. So now I'll discuss how generative AI can be incorporated to address this and other manual processes that we have in translation and localization. You're likely familiar with the software wizards that guide users through the configuration process. A specifications wizard powered by generative AI can act similarly by analyzing the content for translation and localization to produce a more automated report of the work parameters that will define the scope and objectives for the work. A basic T&L specifications wizard can be achieved by prompting a generative AI assistant. For example, in this image, a generative AI assistant has been prompted to produce a specifications report that defines parameters like the language variant of the source text, the primary vertical, the author type, the content type, and the readability level when a user uploads a text. Challenges in designing a system prompt for producing this type of an automated report include defining a standardized ontology of all of the types of content that humans and machines produce and that are translated and localized. Content spans many text types, from blog posts to user-generated content to reports, statements, speeches, and articles, and much, much more. Each text type having its own distinct conventions that make the text that type. To illustrate, patents use a particular language to describe inventions that is neither too broad or too narrow. If the language is too broad, no new invention is actually described. If the language is too narrow, the invention is not fully protected. Another example of a text type is a fortune from a fortune cookie, where philosophical quotes and encouraging predictions that meet strict character limitations are expected. Any ontology of human communication and knowledge needs to be modeled using controlled language in a standardized way to make the information easily retrievable and, more importantly, actionable later downstream. Any system prompt therefore needs to strategically model complex systems within the limitations of the context window of information that generative AI systems can hold in their working memory when analyzing the prompt and the input content to produce an automated report. Now it's one thing to produce an automated report, and it's another thing to make the information collected in the specifications actionable. Ideally, the automations we'd want to put in place include routing the information collected through the wizard to downstream processes in the workflow. We'd want the information collected to be used to automatically carry out and resolve typical translation readiness check issues associated with the content. We'd want the information to be automatically routed to expertise matching in selecting the best available translators and machine translation engines for the work. We'd want the information collected to be used to make recommendations to clients about the service level for their work, and tie the parameters to costs and timelines in order to produce nearly instantaneous quotes. We'd want the information collected to be used to automatically configure workflows and to automatically create projects with the desired configuration in the translation environment tool. We'd want the information to be automatically routed into the style guides used to guide machine and human translation and into the final sanity checklists that are carried out to confirm that deliverables meet the requirements set out in the specifications. We'd want to do all this so that we're helping our clients, whether internal or external to our organization, to meet their KPIs, whether those KPIs are increased engagement, a reduced number of customer support requests, increased sales in the target market, or something else. Being able to execute on automations in translation and localization through a system of this kind in a way that adds value to globalization strategy is doable, and it requires a global network of skilled talent performing in roles like machine learning, software development, product management, project management, terminology management, copy editing, translation, transcreation, subtitling, graphic design, programming, engineering, localization quality assurance, and as subject matter experts, in-culture experts, legal experts, user experience designers, in voiceover and audio engineering, and many more roles and ways that have yet to be imagined. As we embrace the challenges and opportunities of global markets, let us remember that effective translation and localization are not just about going through the motions to render and redesign content. They're about fostering understanding and creating truly global experiences. By leveraging the power of technology and human expertise, we can break down language barriers, connect with diverse audiences, and drive meaningful growth on a global scale. The future of localization is not just about adapting content. It's about crafting local experiences that resonate across borders and cultures, ultimately bringing our world closer together. Thank you for your time.